The briefing room at Marine Corps Experimental Squadron 1 smelled of industrial-strength coffee and stale ambition. Fluorescent lights hummed a flat, indifferent note overhead, casting a sterile glare on the polished concrete floor. Major Elena Rostova stood near the back, a ghost in a plain olive-drab flight suit. Her name tape a simple, block-lettered Rostova. No wings, no squadron patch, no history. She was an observer from the Air Force, a temporary fixture in the high-stakes world of the F-12 Spectre program, and she was being studiously ignored. Colonel Marcus Thorne, commander of VMX-1, stood at the front of the room, basking in the attention of his pilots. He was a man carved from a block of pure confidence, his jaw set, his flight suit practically bursting with self-regard. He gestured toward a sleek, menacing silhouette on the projection screen, the F-12. "Tomorrow, gentlemen, we show the world what the Spectre can do," Thorne announced, his voice booming with the practiced resonance of a man who loved to hear himself speak. "Captain Jensen will be taking prototype 01 up for the final high G-stress validation. The press will be here. The Appropriations Committee will be watching. We are not just flying an aircraft. We are flying the future of Marine Corps aviation." He scanned the faces of the young, eager pilots, the Vipers, Reapers, and Slayers of his squadron. His gaze slid over Rostova and dismissed her in the same instant. He saw a nameless, rankless placeholder, an administrative requirement. "Major Rostova," he said, the name an afterthought, as if he'd just remembered some tedious piece of paperwork. "You'll be in the observation gallery with the sea-level guests. Keep a low profile. This is a Marine show." A few of the junior officers smirked. The message was clear. Stay out of the way, Air Force. Rostova's expression remained neutral. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Her silence was a vacuum, drawing no attention, offering no challenge. She simply observed. She observed the way Captain Viper Jensen puffed out his chest, a mirror of his commanding officer's vanity. She observed the flicker of concern in the eyes of the lead engineer, a civilian named Artie Shah, who stood quietly to the side, her arms crossed tightly. And she observed Master Gunnery Sergeant Miller, the squadron's maintenance chief, whose gaze met hers for a fraction of a second from across the room. In that glance, she saw a shared language of skepticism, a quiet understanding that passed between two professionals who dealt in realities, not rhetoric. The briefing concluded with a round of self-congratulatory applause. As the pilots filed out, their laughter and bravado echoing in the hallway, Rostova remained. She walked over to the schematic of the F-12's flight control system still glowing on the screen. Her eyes traced the complex web of primary, secondary, and tertiary hydraulic lines, the redundant digital fly-by-wire channels, the emergency electrohydrostatic actuators. Her focus was so absolute that she didn't hear Miller approach until he was standing beside her. "Something on your mind, Major?" His voice was a low gravel, weathered by decades of jet wash and late nights on the flight line. Rostova pointed a finger at a small, unassuming junction box deep within the tail assembly schematic. "The cascade failure protocol for the primary actuator control module. The simulation data suggests a potential for harmonic resonance if the system experiences a high-frequency oscillation above 9 Gs. Miller's eyebrows, thick and gray, rose a fraction of an inch. "The engineers said they patched it in the last software update. Said the sims were running clean. Simulations can be sanitized," Rostova said, her voice quiet, devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. "They model the expected. They don't always account for the chaotic variables of real-world atmospheric conditions combined with maximum structural load. The patch feels insufficient. It's a bandage, not a cure." Miller stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just an observer. He'd seen her in the hangar at 0500, talking to his junior mechanics about torque specifications on the Spectre's canards. He'd seen her in the simulator bay long after everyone else had gone home, running diagnostics, not flying glory missions. She never spoke of her own experience. She only asked questions, sharp, insightful questions that made his best people pause and think. Colonel Thorne wants a big show for the cameras, Miller said, his tone carefully neutral. He's pushing the envelope to get his star. The envelope is a boundary, not a target, Rostova replied softly. Push too hard, and it pushes back. She turned and walked away, leaving the master gunnery sergeant standing before the glowing schematic, a seed of deep unease planted in his gut. He knew machinery and he knew people. Colonel Thorne knew how to manage his career. This quiet major from the Air Force, she knew the aircraft. And Miller knew which one mattered more when things went wrong 100,000 feet above the earth. The next morning, the desert air was sharp and cold. The sky a pale, fragile blue stretching to an infinite horizon. The flight line was a hive of controlled activity, a stark contrast to the performative swagger of the previous day. The presence of network news vans and congressional aides had ratcheted the tension to a palpable hum. Colonel Thorne was in his element, holding court with a visiting senator, his dress uniform immaculate, his smile polished. He gestured expansively toward the F-12, a predator of composite materials and advanced alloys gleaming under the rising sun. She's the most advanced fifth-generation plus fighter in the world, Senator. A testament to Marine ingenuity. Rostova stood on the periphery of the observation deck, a utilitarian set of binoculars hanging from her neck. She ignored the VIPs. Her attention was fixed on the aircraft and the ground crew performing the final checks. She watched Captain Jensen's pre-flight walk-around. It was textbook, but it was rushed. He was checking boxes, his mind already on the glory of the flight, not the brutal physics that would govern it. She saw Miller overseeing the fueling, his movements economical and precise. He caught her eye again and gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head, a gesture so subtle it was invisible to anyone not looking for it. The patch was insufficient. The unease from the night before had crystallized into a cold certainty in Rostova's stomach. She moved from the observation deck to the mission control center, a cavernous, darkened room dominated by a massive screen displaying telemetry data. The air was cool and smelled of ozone from the servers. Artie Shah, the lead engineer, sat at her console, her face tight with anxiety. Rostova took a seat at an unused monitoring station in the back corner, pulling on a headset and patching into the squadron's internal comms loop. She didn't speak. She just listened. Tower, this is Spectre 01. Ready for taxi. Jensen's voice was a little too tight, a little too high. Spectre 01, you are cleared for taxi to runway 30. Wind is calm. The F-12's twin engines spooled up with a deep, resonant whine that vibrated through the concrete walls of the control room. On the main screen, a camera view showed the aircraft moving with a liquid grace, its delta wing profile futuristic and lethal. This is it. Thorne's voice boomed over the room's speakers from his command position at the front. Let's give them a show, Viper. Roger that, Colonel. Showtime. The F-12 lined up on the runway, a shimmering mirage of heat exhaust distorting the air behind it. With a final clearance from the tower, Jensen pushed the throttles to their stops. The afterburners kicked in with a deafening roar, two plumes of incandescent blue-white flame erupting from the engines. The aircraft surged forward, consuming the runway in seconds before rotating with a breathtaking, near-vertical climb that drew gasps from the VIPs on the observation deck. For the first 10 minutes, the flight was flawless. Jensen put the Spectre through its paces. High-speed passes, Immelman turns, aileron rolls that were crisp and precise. The telemetry data flowing onto the screens in mission control painted a picture of a perfect machine performing perfectly. Thorne was beaming, narrating the maneuvers for the senator with the flair of a sports commentator. And now, Captain Jensen will demonstrate the Spectre's unparalleled agility at high altitude and G-loading, Thorne announced. He's taking her up to 40,000 feet for the validation sequence. Rostova leaned forward, her eyes locked on a small block of numbers in the corner of her monitor. Hydraulic pressure, actuator response times, vibration harmonics, the data no one else was watching. Spectre 01, I am commencing the high-G test series. Jensen's voice crackled over the comms. Engaging at Mach 1.5. Here we go. The F-12, a silver glint in the deep blue of the stratosphere, banked hard. On the screen, the G-meter climbed rapidly. 3, 4, 5. The numbers were green. Stable. 6, 7, 8. The numbers turned yellow. Little bit of wing buffet. Control, Jensen reported, his breathing now audible. But she's holding steady. Push it to 9, Viper, Thorne commanded. Show them what she's made of. Artie Shah stiffened at her console. Colonel, the parameters call for a gradual increase. We're on schedule, Ms. Shah. Thorne cut her off, his tone sharp with irritation. Let the pilot fly the plane. Rostova's fingers tightened on the edge of her console. She saw it first. A flicker in the harmonic frequency data from the starboard taileron actuator. It was almost imperceptible, a tiny ghost in the machine. On the screen, the G-meter ticked to 90. For a second, everything held. Then the number flashed red. A klaxon blared through mission control. A synthesized voice, calm and terrifying, announced, "Warning. Flight control system failure." "What the hell?" Thorne barked. "Viper, report. I've got a master caution." Jensen's voice was strained, laced with the first threads of panic. "Losing hydraulic pressure in primary system B. Flight controls are sluggish. It's not responding." The F-12 wobbled in its turn, then snapped violently into an uncontrolled roll. On the main screen, the horizon spun wildly. "I can't stop the roll. I've lost control." Jensen's breathing was ragged now, his words clipped by the strain of the G-forces. "Switch to backup actuators." Thorne yelled, his command a desperate guess. "Now, Viper." Trying. No response. "Oh God. It's getting worse." The aircraft was now in a flat spin, falling out of the sky like a leaf. Centrifugal force was pinning Jensen to his seat, threatening to black him out. The telemetry on the screens devolved into a chaotic waterfall of red warnings. Cascade failure, just as Rostova had predicted. The harmonic resonance had shaken the actuator control module to pieces, triggering a complete system collapse. Panic began to ripple through the control room. Junior officers were shouting suggestions. Thorne stood frozen, his face ashen. The confident commander vanished, replaced by a man watching his career and a $250 million prototype plummet toward the desert floor. "Mayday, mayday, mayday!" Jensen screamed over the comms, his voice thin with terror. "I'm in an unrecoverable spin. Altitude 30,000 and falling fast. Preparing to eject." "Do not eject!" Thorne roared, a desperate attempt to reassert authority. "That is a prototype aircraft, Captain." It was the wrong command, born of desperation to save the hardware, not the pilot. In that moment of chaos, Rostova acted. She didn't stand up. She didn't shout. She simply pressed the transmit button on her console, her voice cutting through the noise with chilling calm. "Spectre 01, this is Observer," she said, her tone level, almost conversational. "Disregard that last. Do not eject yet. I need you to listen to me. Breathe." There was a stunned silence in the room. Every head turned toward the back corner. Thorne whirled around, his face a mask of fury. "Major, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get off that comm." Rostova ignored him. Her focus was absolute, a laser beam connecting her to the terrified pilot miles above. "Viper, I know you can hear me. The spin is disorienting you. Your instincts are wrong. Stop fighting the controls. Take your hands off the stick and your feet off the rudder pedals. Now." I can't." "The G's," Jensen stammered. "Yes, you can." Rostova's voice was firm, a lifeline of pure competence in the storm of static and fear. "Let go of the controls. The aircraft wants to stabilize. Let it try." Hesitantly, Jensen complied. On the screen, the spin rate began to slow just slightly. The wild oscillations became a little less violent. "Good," Rostova said. "Now listen carefully. We are going to bypass the primary flight control computer. It's compromised. I want you to find the manual reversion panel. It's on your right-hand console, below the throttle quadrant. It has a guarded red switch. Colonel, I demand you remove her from that channel, Thorne bellowed, taking a step toward her. But before he could reach her, Master Gunnery Sergeant Miller was suddenly there, a solid wall of quiet authority between his colonel and the Air Force major. Sir, Miller said, his voice dangerously low. Let her work. Thorne stopped, momentarily stunned by the insubordination. He looked from Miller's granite face to Rostova, who hadn't even flinched. She was completely absorbed, her mind inside the cockpit of the falling F-12. I see it, Jensen said, his voice a little steadier. The guard is down. Lift the guard. Throw the switch, Rostova commanded. You will hear a loud clunk. The control surfaces are now in direct linkage. It will feel like you are flying a tank. The inputs will be heavy and delayed. A metallic thunk was audible over the comm. Okay. Switches thrown. The stick feels heavy, like it's set in concrete. That's what we want, Rostova confirmed. Now we need to break the spin. I want you to apply full left rudder. Do not touch the stick. Just full, steady pressure on the left rudder. Hold it. Left rudder applying. Jensen grunted with the effort. In the control room, everyone held their breath. They watched the telemetry. The spin rate, which had stabilized at 120 degrees per second, began to decrease. 110. 100. 90. It's working, Artie Shah whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. The spin is breaking. Nose is starting to pitch down, Jensen reported, the relief in his voice palpable. Altitude 15,000. We're out of the spin, but we're in a dive. A steep 1 inch. Expected, Rostova said calmly. Airspeed is increasing rapidly. Do not pull back on the stick yet. You'll induce a high-speed stall and snap roll. I want you to deploy the air brakes. Gently. Deploying brakes. The dive began to shallow. The screaming overspeed alarm cut out. Okay, you're below 400 knots, Rostova said, her eyes scanning the data streams. Now you can fly the aircraft. Gentle back pressure on the stick. Small, deliberate inputs. You are flying on hydraulics and steel cables. No computer is helping you. Feel the plane. For the next 5 minutes, Rostova talked Jensen through the delicate process of regaining stable flight. She was a surgeon, a teacher, a pilot, all at once. She gave him airspeed callouts, altitude warnings, and configuration changes with a precision that was nothing short of breathtaking. She was no longer just an observer. She was the central nervous system of the entire operation. Thorne stood by, silent and impotent. His authority had evaporated. The room, his squadron, no longer looked to him. They were all focused on the calm, quiet woman in the back corner who was pulling a pilot and his prototype out of a death spiral. Spectre 01, Rostova said, her tone shifting slightly. We need to think about getting you on the ground. Your landing gear is on the compromised primary hydraulic system. There is a strong possibility it will not deploy. A new wave of tension washed over the room. Saving the plane from the spin was one thing. Landing a 40,000-pound fighter with no landing gear was another. So, a belly landing? Jensen asked, his voice trembling again. That's the last resort, Rostova said. First, we try the emergency blowdown system. It uses pressurized nitrogen to force the gear down and locked. But we only get one shot. Are you ready to copy the procedure? Before Jensen could respond, a new voice cut across the comm channel. It was crisp, authoritative, and amplified directly from the Pentagon's National Military Command Center. Stand by on that procedure, observer. The voice was familiar to every senior officer in the room. It belonged to General Harrison Vance, a 4-star and the head of the entire experimental weapons development program for the Joint Chiefs. Thorne's back went ramrod straight. General Vance, sir. Colonel Thorne here. We have a situation with the F-12 prototype, but Major Rostova is... Vance cut him off, his tone like chipped ice. I know who she is, Colonel. I've been monitoring. Her call sign is Wraith. and I suggest you listen to whatever she has to say." A stunned silence fell over mission control. Wraith. The name was legendary in the test pilot community, a ghost story, a myth. Wraith was the pilot they sent in when a program was on the verge of catastrophic failure. The pilot who had recovered the X-47 from an inverted supersonic spin. The one who had landed a B-2 Spirit with 2 engine fires and a complete electrical failure. No one knew Wraith's real name or what they looked like. They were a legend. Vance's voice came again, this time directed at Rostova, laced with a deep, familiar respect that stunned the listeners even more. "Wraith, it's been a while. Do you need anything from my end?" Rostova finally looked up from her console, her focus momentarily broken. She keyed the mic. "General. Good to hear your voice. I have control of the situation. We are preparing for a gear blowdown and emergency landing." "Understood," Vance said. Then he addressed the room at large, his voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. "For the information of everyone in that room, Major Elena Rostova is the lead developmental test pilot for the entire X-plane initiative. She has forgotten more about experimental flight control systems than any of you will ever learn. She wrote half the emergency procedures in the book for this aircraft. Frankly, she is the finest test pilot in the world. Colonel Thorne, your only job right now is to give her anything she requires. Is that clear?" Thorne's face was a mess of conflicting emotions. Shock, humiliation, dawning comprehension. He looked at the unassuming woman in the plain flight suit, the woman he had dismissed as a glorified secretary, and saw her for what she was, a quiet giant who had just saved his pilot, his squadron, and his career from utter ruin. "Crystal clear, General," Thorne managed to choke out, his voice barely a whisper. Rostova was already back at work, unfazed by the revelation. "Let's not waste any more time, General. Spectre 01, let's walk through the blowdown sequence. We're bringing you home." The tension in the room had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by a focused electric awe. They were watching a master at work. Rostova guided Jensen through the emergency procedure with the patience of a flight instructor and the precision of a brain surgeon. She had him orbit the base while ground crews cleared the main runway and foamed a section of it, just in case. She talked him through the weight and balance calculations for a no-flaps, high-speed approach. "Okay, Viper," she said as he lined up for his final approach, the crippled F-12 looking unsteady in the long-range camera view. "Time to see if we have wheels. On my mark, pull the emergency gear handle. It will require about 50 pounds of force. Pull it straight back until it locks." "Standing by," Jensen breathed. 3, 2, 1. "Mark." There was a moment of agonizing silence. Then, a voice from the runway control officer crackled over the speakers. "We have confirmation. 3 green. I say again, Spectre 01 has 3 down and locked." A wave of cheers and relieved sighs swept through mission control. Thorne sagged against his console, his face pale. Rostova, however, remained focused. "Don't celebrate yet," she said crisply into the comms. "The gear is down, but you have no nose-wheel steering and no brakes. You're going to land long and you're going to need the arresting cable. Can you see the wire?" "Affirmative," Jensen said, his confidence returning. "I see the wire. Fly the numbers I gave you. 170 knots on approach. Don't flare too much. Let it settle onto the runway and engage the cable. I'll be with you all the way down." The next 90 seconds were the longest in anyone's memory. The F-12 came in fast and flat. Touched down hard, tires smoking on the asphalt. It hurtled down the runway, directly for the thick steel arresting cable stretched across its path. The tailhook, which had deployed with the gear, snagged the wire with a shower of sparks. The cable went taut, and the F-12 was thrown forward before being yanked to a violent, screeching halt just a few hundred feet from the end of the runway. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the distant whine of the idling engines. Then, Jensen's voice, shaking with adrenaline and relief, filled the room. "Hook down on the deck. Spectre 01 is safe." The room erupted. People were clapping, hugging, shaking hands. It was a victory snatched from the jaws of absolute disaster. Through it all, Rostova sat quietly at her station. She watched as the crash crews surrounded the F-12, and as a shaken but unharmed Captain Jensen was helped from the cockpit. She listened to his initial hotwash report with the crew chief, her expression unreadable. Only when the aircraft was secured and the immediate crisis was over did she finally remove her headset. The silence that followed was profound. She stood up, her joints stiff. As she turned, she found every eye in the room on her. Colonel Thorne, Captain Jensen, who had just been escorted in, the junior pilots, the engineers, the NCOs. The arrogance and dismissal were gone, replaced by a mixture of awe, shame, and profound respect. Thorne approached her, his posture no longer proud and erect, but stooped with the weight of his own hubris. "Major, Rostova, He struggled for words. "There's nothing I can say. Thank you. You saved my pilot. You saved this program." Rostova simply nodded. She didn't need the apology or the praise. The outcome was all that mattered. "Your pilot followed procedures under extreme duress, Colonel. He did well. And your ground crew's response was immediate and professional." She shared the credit, deflecting the spotlight with an ease that made Thorne's earlier preening seem even more hollow. She looked at Captain Jensen, whose face was pale and streaked with sweat. He looked at her not as a superior officer, but as a student looks at a master. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse, "I've never seen anything like that. How did you know about the reversion panel, the spin characteristics?" "I spent 600 hours in the simulator breaking this aircraft," Rostova said, her tone matter-of-fact. "I found that failure mode 4 months ago. The report is on your desk, Colonel. Page 82. Appendix C." Thorne flinched as if struck. He hadn't read it. He'd dismissed the thick binder from the Air Force Observer as bureaucratic makework. The bandage, not the cure. Her words hung in the air, a quiet, devastating indictment of his leadership. Without another word, Rostova turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd of officers and engineers parted for her like water. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Master Gunnery Sergeant Miller. He gave her a slow, respectful nod, the same gesture from the briefing room, but this time it was filled with vindication and profound admiration. She returned it, a flicker of a smile touching her lips for the first time. It was the only validation she needed. An hour later, as dusk painted the desert sky in hues of orange and purple, Thorne found her. She wasn't in the officers' club accepting congratulations. She wasn't on the phone with General Vance. She was in the quiet solitude of the hangar, standing before the damaged F-12. The aircraft was scarred, trailing hydraulic fluid and smelling of burnt rubber, but it was whole. She was running a gloved hand over a seam on the wing, her brow furrowed in concentration, her mind already working on the next problem, on the fix. She was dressed in her simple flight suit, her helmet and gear bag resting on a nearby maintenance cart. The setting sun cast a long shadow behind her, the shadow of a pilot who had faced the void and returned. Thorne didn't say anything for a long time. He just watched the woman who had single-handedly rewritten the future of his squadron. He had built his command on noise, on image, on authority demanded. She commanded absolute loyalty and performance through nothing more than quiet, undeniable competence. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and stripped of all its former bluster. "Major Rostova, what do you need from me?" She looked up from the aircraft, her gaze direct and clear. "A complete engineering review of the flight control module. Full access for my team. And Colonel," she added, her voice softening just a fraction, "I need your pilots to stop trying to impress the cameras and start learning the machines they're flying. The envelope is a boundary. We were lucky today." Thorne nodded, the lesson landing with the force of a physical blow. "Understood, Major. Understood." He left her there, alone with the machine she had saved. Rostova turned her attention back to the F-12. She picked up her helmet from the cart, its visor reflecting the last rays of the dying light. With a soft cloth from her gear bag, she began to methodically, meticulously, clean the viewport, her movements practiced and calm. The simple, rhythmic task of a professional preparing for the next flight, her focus already on the sky, on the work yet to be done. The quiet act was its own statement. The show was over, the real work continued, and everyone now knew who was truly in command.